Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you for being here near the bitter end. It's pleasing to see there's still more of you than there are of us, so none of you dare leave. The longer term question of the industry surely depends upon the quality of people it attracts. And so it's appropriate as we think about these questions at a conference which understandably has been dominated by short-term macro trends that we try and row back a bit to those longer-term questions about where the industry might be in 5, 10, 15 years' time. To assist me on this quest, I am blessed with a stellar set of individuals who inexplicably and outrageously missed out on the Oscar nominations yesterday, but in other respects should surely dominate any stage. I'll ask the three of them to introduce themselves and their institutions to begin with, and then we will dive headlong in to some of the questions about private equity and talent that the industry doesn't always like to ask itself, at least not publicly. So I'll start with you, Rupert.
Thank you. Is that on? Yeah. Thank you, Tim. My name is Rupert Bell. I'm British, but I'm based in Germany, running a small boutique headhunting business called PER. Our main business is hiring investment professionals for a range of different strategies, and we do some portfolio management work as well.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Sophie Chateau. I'm a partner at LBO France, and I'm heading the investor relations and have an eye on the recruitment policy as well.
And my name is Isabelle Bougenat. I'm in charge of the private equity practice at Korn Ferry in Paris and covering, in France and covering Benelux. This covers both the GP side of it as well as the portfolio companies, and it's both talent acquisition, as we will discuss today, but also human capital advisory services. So we can come back to that as well.
Thank you very much. And I'm Tim Hames. I'm here as a consultant with 17 Capital, but I'm also a writer in residence with Equity FD, which is a UK-based specialist private equity recruitment service, predominantly around finance directors, but also chairs and non-executives as well. So we have enough in common, I think, for a conversation. So I said that we tackle questions bluntly that perhaps the industry doesn't always like to address. And so I'll start with a proper sort of spitball for the three of you. For many, many years, the impression has been given, at least for the larger end of the PE market, that it could rely on a conveyor belt of talent coming out of investment banking and then just sort of sit there and wait for them to drop. Has that conveyor belt reached the end of the line, or is it reaching the end of the line very soon? Rupert.
My perception is that there's still a very high degree of attraction for a career in private equity, and I can't think of another job that gives you the diversity of content in terms of strategy, finance, operations, people, the diversity of people and sectors that you deal with. So I think there is always going to be an appetite for the next generation of bright young things. My perception is slightly different, though. The job itself has got harder, and we see at these events more and more the way in which firms are having to grow ever more competitive, ever more sophisticated to remain in the game. And just put very bluntly, I think you need more bodies than you used to do to stay competitive. So the demand side of this equation has risen sharply in recent years, not just because assets under management have grown, but because the job itself is more complex. So there is a mismatch now between that conveyor belt, as you call it, that is continuing to churn out bright young things from banking, from consulting careers. Many of those have different exit options as well, in fact, as to where they may go. But what I call the client side, essentially your market, need more and they need different from what they had in the past.
Sophie.
Yeah. Well, on that one, I agree with Rupert. I think, for instance, before on our team, mid-cap team, we have 6 investment professionals. But in fact, we have almost double the team with the operating team with 6 people. So I would say to do the same job, we need twice as many people as we needed before.
I would tend to agree with that. I mean, there's well, first, the industry is still very appealing, I mean, for sure. And there is a shortage of talent, but we need clearly to distinguish basically the investment professional from the other side. And the other side is actually quite plural because it's operating partners, but it's also central functions, it's investor relations as well. And if you look at all that, there is a diversity of type of profiles basically, where you know the investment professionals all came from the same industries in the past, and even if again we're trying to get people from slightly different industries, when you try to hire people maybe slightly later in their career, like director or investment manager and so on, the private equity funds themselves try to look for talent that do have that private equity experience. So it goes back into circles. So that's probably where the real shortage of talent comes. But one way to try to find a solution for that is actually to add different types of profiles through the, again, operating partners, but also other functions as well.
So isn't that, in a sense, many ways, kind of inevitable, given that you say the changing nature of the industry? I spoke to a very senior figure at a very, very, very big fund who's been there for 30 odd years, who told me that, you know, when I started in this industry, I was a punk rocker. I'm now offering easy listening. You know, that's the whole nature of the business has changed from being an upstart and insurgents, people not even knowing what you did if you met them at events, to mainstream. So do you think psychologically, given that it's still quite a young industry in that respect, people have sort of fully appreciated the extent to which they can't just hire duplicates of themselves?
I think we need more punk rockers, not less, actually, in this industry. It seems to me that it's matured, particularly in the last 10 years. And I think a career, particularly in a large firm, is dramatically different for someone starting in one of those firms compared to someone who's now a senior person in the path that they've been on. We don't talk about alternative assets anymore. It is quite often institutionalized, and I think people are looking for often different things. I'm put in mind of a conversation I had 18 months ago with a chap who'd done his 8-10 years working his way up a hierarchy and had been given the green light that he was going to be made partner, and for the first time suddenly woke up and said, I'm not sure I want this anymore. It's rather like those politicians who say the Republican Party left me, not the other way around. It had changed around him. So I think that mix of personal career aspiration and the needs of the organisation has evolved very rapidly.
Sophie, you still a punk at heart?
No, but it's true that people want visibility. I mean, it was a private equity, it was a small team, a very vertical way of management. And it was a bit like, you know, in the investment banking, you don't really question yourself. Today, first, private equity has industrialized and it's become a practice or a sector in itself. And so, young people, they want to, of course, they want to know why they are working, and they want to have a nice working climate. I mean, they can work long hours, no problem, but at least you need to have a warm atmosphere, you need to do social events, much more. And this is very important because of talent retention, I would say. So that's, I think, the transformation, which is not, it's not only private equity, it's more the whole industry, but private equity has probably to reinvent itself more.
And maybe as well, with the platformization of many of the GPs, there is a strong, a bigger continuum, basically, in the different categories. There was a VC world, there was the LBO world in the past, and now there's between late VC, growth equity, late growth equity to small cap LBO. I mean, I'm not saying that everybody's doing the same, which is completely not true, but a team can have different sort of strategies into one global team, and that brings a bit of diversity in itself, because you will have some central functions, for example, again, as well as operating partners that will move from one portfolio company to the other. So that avoids a bit that duplication that you just mentioned earlier on, and indeed the culture is changing a little bit with more flex, work and ways of working. So there is a need, obviously, to evolve a little bit.
Okay, well, let's come back to that. Obviously, the pandemic has had the impact right across the world of work of triggering considerable change in what people want and will put up with, and the balance of power, if you like, between employer and employee, even in very high prestige positions such as private equity, has obviously also changed. Has the industry sufficiently adapted to the fact that we're not in 2018 any longer? Rupert?
My favourite cartoon that I've seen in the last few years, and you'll know Private Eye magazine as a Brit, is a picture of a long boardroom table with 15 identically dressed men sitting behind it, all wearing the corporate uniform, white shirt, black tie, and one lonely woman sitting in front of them who's clearly interviewing for a job. And the man in the middle, who looks like the boss, is leaning back in his chair and says to her, "So what do you think you can offer us?" And for me, that epitomizes part of the problem here when we talk about, for example, the diversity agenda and also the cultural side. I think the industry has rapidly had to adjust to the fact that they're in sales mode when it comes to talent. If you don't make the effort, you're not going to get the talent. The brand doesn't necessarily count for what it used to in the past. And I think increasingly when I take on projects with people I've not worked for before, the first thing I go to is, who are you? What am I got to sell for you? And I'm convinced it's culture far more than strategy. So soft skills, knowledge of yourself, a sense of identity, and what does a career with you look like? And I think if you can get that right, you're quite well positioned to find the people that you want. If you can't, you're in trouble.
What about you, Sophie? Has your institution changed the way it sees working habits? For example, around working from home, stroke working from the office, hours culture and all that?
I mean, of course it has changed as everybody. We have some remote work, but not very much actually. It's only 1 day a week, so it's quite small. But we have noticed that usually young people, they even came on Friday because I think they like to be together as well, and small flat are not the easiest way to work. Well, first we adapt, but I think it's also a change of generation. I mean, at LBO France, our chairman, our CEO has become chairman. Of course, he's older. There is a change of generation. So I think we are probably, I would say, more oriented to care the people and to make sure that they feel in a warm atmosphere. And it's important, for instance, we had that Christmas party. For us, it was the first time. We were very traditional with sort of Christmas lunch. And the feedback was where the interns were completely happy and they really loved it. And we say, if we can speak positively, because today is not just about the daily work, it's about reputation, social media, and everything. And we say, that's the best way to attract, more intern and then future talent to our company.
I remember just before COVID, so there was another softness cycle before that. A fund client actually who was willing to recruit an investment director, and they were saying, well, we will see soon. I mean, they didn't know that COVID was coming, of course, but nobody knew. But everybody thought that there was a bit of something happening, and we were at a peak in the industry. And we were saying, well, people, when it starts to go down, we will see the difference between the good carry and the so-so carry, and we're going to be able to poach people that, want to go with the good carry GP. At the end of the day, we obviously recruited someone that is great, but there is a real shortage of talent in that industry, and it is clear today again and again. So the industry is a long-term industry, and it takes a lot of time, a full cycle, to train people in that industry, and the industry is continuing to grow. So there's, and I would say, nothing we can really do to at the very short term to stop that shortage. So the idea is really to find a different way of thinking about that. And even if, for a period of time, maybe in the next 6 months or so, maybe some buyout funds will recruit a bit less than usual, the candidates themselves will also think twice before trying to go to somewhere else, because they're not really sure that it's much greener outside the current firm. So we have to be cautious about how we look at it. That's really the message here.
Well, you've been brave enough to raise the C word, carry, which is has to be part of the dialogue about what employees expect from employers. I can think of a very, very, very successful UK mid-market company, improper to name them, where I think a very large factor of success is the two founding partners take less than 20% of the carry, and that people who've been there 5 years have a carry entitlement, and it's not an insignificant or nominal one. But that's not the norm. So, Rupert, are people going to have to be a little bit more, shall we say, democratic with carry, rather than expect people to work for 15 years before they get a sniff of it?
I have to be careful what I say here. I'm tempted to say yes, though. Actually, if I may, at least in my experience, slightly, if you'll forgive me, correct me, I think it's quite normal for carry to be given to very junior people now, not 5 years in, but 5 months in, providing there is a efficient clawback mechanism if they leave. Simply because if you don't, someone else will. I've seen one example recently where the founder of a Scandinavian mid-cap fund has essentially retired and has left everything behind, which is a very unusual precedent. I'm not sure how much that will be copied, but I think your underlying point that if the founders don't show a willingness to distribute, it's hard to see the business survive them. And I think there are going to be... My market is Germany, which is really still quite immature relative to the French market. And many of these founders are, I think, wrestling with exactly this topic. Do we just cash out? Sorry, do we run this thing for cash and then leave and it shuts behind us? Or do we enable something that will have the foundations to be a more substantial long-term business in the way that many other French, British, American firms have done before them already?
I think, yes, carry, it's good and it's still an important part. And I think it's important to give some carry to junior people. But for me, carry has never been an element of retention, especially for young people. So you really have to work on the other aspects of a job.
And probably even for younger people, generation like analysts or associates, it's difficult to see where you're going to be in 10 years' time. So how do they actually, value that carry when they come in? Would that make sense to have a more like a 3 or 5 year retention rather than just a 10 or 12 years? It's a question mark. But just back on your question on partners, there's partner and partner. Partner in a strategy in a platform company or platform GP versus a more entrepreneurial project. Well, it probably doesn't deserve the same amount, and which is the case. So democratization will probably come with larger institutions because it's an institution. In fact, it's not depending on one person in particular.
Let's get back to this culture point, Anna, because I think it's worth exploring, and again, it varies across the industry. And it's partly a sense of what the industry thinks it is, and it's a curious industry. In one sense, people will sort of pop it into a bucket named financial services. But quite a lot of people would say, no, that's not quite right. I remember Jerry Murphy, former chairman of Blackstone Europe, going very politely ballistic at the suggestion that he was part of the financial services sector. He didn't see that remotely as his role in life. His role in life was to find good companies, make them better, help them exit. He regarded himself as part of the business community, not financial services. So I think that, again, in terms of how you present yourself to prospective employees, does private equity fully appreciate that it needs to come over as closer to Google than Goldman Sachs? Nothing wrong with Goldman Sachs, so I know he's got to stand here, but...
I think, in my experience, Goldman Sachs has actually got quite a good name in this industry for people. There's a an uninformed perception, I think, that they're a sort of hotbed of macho arrogance, and I think increasingly they're not. The people that I see coming into this industry have got hard skills and soft skills, and I think more and more the soft skills are the path to success. Hard skills are the entry-level requirement, but soft skills are what make it work. For me, culture, my colleague calls this, it's just as simple as it's how we do things around here. And it takes in a wide net of, yes, it's the mood around the coffee machine, but it will also include the way that the seniors and the juniors interact. One very simple test is, are you actually allowed in the room when the deal that you're working on is being discussed at investment committee? You think that was obvious, but there's a surprisingly high number of firms where that doesn't happen. So how are you supposed to know what you're aiming at if you can't hear that discussion? And then I would extend it into who gets promoted and why, who leaves and why. And ultimately, the acid test is, what do people say about this firm who used to work there? Social networks, social media means that anybody applying for a job in 3 clicks gets a pretty good view. And so you have to be mindful about reputation at this cultural level.
I think there is a lot of work that especially France Invest made and to explain, well, I mean, as far as France is concerned, to explain that, you know, we are here to support companies, to help them growing. That's an important counterpart and a real partner of the companies. But I think still, I mean, the perception, at least in France, is very negative. I mean, the global picture. So after, I mean, it's not the case with startup. Today, I mean, the young, they dream about going to startup, even VC funds, but, you know, buyout, it's more, I would say, more difficult to change. So I think it's really a question, I think, of role model and of what we do and how the people are. And it's probably with that way that we will try to, I think, to change the perception and attract new people, and even, I would work about, I would say, diversity of talent in an industry, and especially, I would say, for buyout more than for VC, where it's true that the profiles are relatively the same, meaning, you know, top-tier business school, but, and coming from, yes, investment bank, as we say, consultancy firm. So bringing a bit more diversity would probably help in the next few years.
I agree. Maybe just back to your point, there are probably, I mean, the good news about an industry that is growing and maturing is that there are as many cultures as there are GPs probably. And I mean, the large cap ones will continue to attract a lot of people by definition because they are seen as the best in class. The economics obviously are typically higher over there as well. But there is also a lot of fund formation, and we've seen that recently as well. So, you know, typically partners or senior professionals that have grown in the Goldman Sachs of the world will start the Googles tomorrow, and that's great to have both. And you don't need to choose, you actually choose where you want to work, which is a bit different.
Okay, I'd like to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions or offer observations before, or else I will try and telepathically assume what's the questions. Are there any questions, comments, or war stories out there around recruitment that people would like to share? Okay, if not, diversity and a coherent diversity strategy in recruitment. Without naming names, what does a good strategy look like and what does a lousy one look like, Rupert?
I think it has to be patient. If you try and force, I mean, diversity at the moment seems to mean gender in this industry, but there's many other dimensions to it. I sit in a country-driven team where there are language requirements. So although you may wish to try and bring first-generation immigrants into it, unless they've got native-level language skills, it's very difficult. So for now, it's about gender. I think the more one can have role models inside an organization who can act as internal sponsors, mentors, coaches, whatever the word is, I think that's extremely important, not just in the development, but also in the recruitment phase. The opposite is how it works badly. If you have an impatient manager who's been told by their LPs they need to change and wants results overnight, that feels inauthentic to me.
I agree completely. I think it's good to change some bias, but we have to take time and not coming from one another to another. I mean, like I think gender diversity and so on. I mean, well, we have to do it, but not in too much hurry, because otherwise it's a bit like greenwashing. It won't feel sincere.
It takes time, indeed, but you may force it a little bit as well. I mean, if diversity, which means gender diversity, but can be also other types of diversity in terms of diversity of profiles. I mean, we touched upon it at the beginning of the discussion. There can be a strategy, and if you're looking at a specific role and say, well, by the way, it's females only, well, the pool of candidates, which is already short, is becoming even more shorter. Which makes it very hard. So either you say, well, I want to attract women, for example, and then if that's the one that you found very appealing to your strategy and to your platform is, say, 3 years older or 3 years younger than what you wanted, then maybe you'd rather try to integrate her into your platform and will make it work. Or you decide, well, I want that specific type of seniority filled in, and then maybe you will look more sideways, not necessarily with the same private equity standard as you were looking for example, male candidate, and you will bring both diversity from a background point of view as well as women as well.
I just don't compromise. You've got to get good people,
Absolutely.
Otherwise your business moves backwards. So don't compromise. But you may be able to flex some of the, as you say, either level of experience or whether the pedigree of a brand, but the individual's talent and motivation is still as strong.
Okay,
It's
a final question to wrap up then. If the consensus is, and I sense it is, that PE may not necessarily have a talent crisis, but it certainly has a talent challenge, in that it has to think about talent differently and probably find different sorts of people than it did previously. Is this a blessing in disguise? Rupert.
Insofar as it brings new skills, new perspectives, possibly yes. And I think for me, this diversity issue is not, it's not about token gestures. And for all that I'm in favour of fairness and equality for everyone in the workforce, I think the incentive should be that if you have true diversity, you have more insight on each commercial decision that you're making, and therefore you make better decisions. So yes, I think there are silver linings in this as the industry grows and evolves.
I think it's, I mean, this, I would say, talent crisis or talent challenge, I mean, it's not only us, it's also, you feel the same in the portfolio companies, I mean, to recruit the right talent, especially when the company is growing. So what it is important is that you had the investment team, you had finance predominantly, then I would say the investor relations came because people discovered that it's not only about doing a good job, but communicating well and having a dedicated team to do so. And I think for human resources, it's probably now the key challenge. So recruiting the right people, having somebody internally that really can address and tackle those issues. So, I mean, also it brings diversity in terms of function in the private equity firm as well.
And the final word to you, Isabel.
Well, it's always a good thing to be in shortage. It means that the industry is growing, so that's rather a positive sign, I would say, and it will require as well private capital, private equity funds to reinvent themselves a bit more, especially on the talent management side, not only on the recruitment, because recruitment is just the one first event, but then it also requires to retain people, to develop people, and make sure that they're happy where they are.
Splendid. Well, on behalf of the audience, I'd like to thank the panel. On behalf of the panel, I'd like to thank the audience. And I hope to see as many of you as possible at 4 o'clock for the Mediterranean Bash. Thank you very much for listening to us.